Our last speaker of this session, we are very proud to have Dr. Deanna McMillan to talk about drug abuse and human trafficking. Please welcome her.
Good afternoon, almost evening. I'm gratified for those of you who have the patience and fortitude to wait for the last speaker. I know I'm the only thing standing between you and a nap, and I appreciate. It's so ironic that the topic that I'm speaking of is often those people in our society, especially in a place like this, that are thought of last and sometimes forgotten. So my name is Dr. Deanna McMillan. I do work at Ivy Tech, and it's interesting, you know, what Sherry Shipley said about educators. I'm considered at risk. For those of us who are educators, I'm not speaking on behalf of Ivy Tech. Hopefully, even though that's up there on our live stream, I still have a job on Monday after what I have to say. And I want to let you know that I am an educator, I am an engineer, and out of my experience, not my work experience, but what I've interacted with and who I've spoken to within this community, this particular community. I'm from New York City, but I've been here for 11 years. I've been a crisis center volunteer, someone who has been trained in suicide prevention, and I am currently one of the very few rape survivor advocates in this area, in a 5-county area. I am also certified at an ACA healthcare navigator, so I have been trained in the Affordable Care Act. And I'm also certified in mental health first aid for adults and children. So I'm speaking to you from my experience and not necessarily from my paid profession. And I want to read to you, and I'm cognizant of the time, so I know there's probably a hook behind me, so I'm going to talk a little fast. The definition of drug addiction, and in the certification is substance use disorder. But the definition of drug addiction that I came up with is drug addiction can be defined as a chronic relapsing illness in which an individual develops a severe physical and psychological dependence on drugs such that the compulsion to use drugs is overpowering despite the knowledge of detrimental consequences. That's the definition that I came up with. So I'm going to read you the first list of drugs that people are at. It's like the top 10 list. And this is the street list. The street list is alcohol, bath salts, cocaine, crack, ecstasy, heroin, inhalants, ketamine, I'm not quite sure what that is, marijuana, and meth. Now, if you're above the age of 3, you've probably come in contact with something like that, if you're above the age of 3. Now, I'm not going to ask any of you if you've tried any of those or if you inhaled any of those, but I just want you to let you know that's the street list. That's the, you know, in the alleyway dime bag, I don't know if there's still dime bag list. Now, let me read you the other list for those who have health care and access. The other list: Adderall, Ambien, Ativan, hydrocodone, oxycodone, Percocet, Tramadol, I don't know what that is, Valium, Vicodin, Vyvanse, and Xanax. Now, if you're in this room, chances are, whether you tried or inhaled anything from the street list, if you've had a tooth pulled, if you pulled a muscle, if you crooked your finger, or if you've used a computer, or you've had a headache, you've been prescribed legally or have access to somebody who has taken some of these drugs, or you've been prescribed some of these drugs. Now, the issues of substance use disorders are virtually undetectable until there's been those negative consequences. So I want you to know that in terms of drug addiction or substance abuse disorder, chances are the person to the right or the left of you, remember in school when they said the person to the right or the left of you may not be there, the chances of you with these many people in the room, the person to the right or the left of you, if not you yourself, has been subjected to substance use disorder. So then what prevents or treats that is the diagnosis, the counseling, the treatment, or the recovery of that addiction. Now, that's addiction. Now, addictions are linked to inextricably, and this is why the Affordable Care Act has been broadened to address community health issues, has been linked to chronic illnesses, depression, economic distress, and homelessness. Chances are if you suffer or have been subjected to one, that you will be subjected to another. So let me share with you some of the mental health disorders that we go through the training to address that are inextricably linked to substance use disorder. Autism, ADHD, anxiety disorders, bipolarism, suicide, depression, childhood mental disorders and illnesses, eating disorders, impulse control, internet addiction, intellectual disabilities, obsessive compulsive disorder, personality disorders, PTSD, schizophrenia, sexual disorders, Tourette's. Okay, so if any of this has ever touched your life, you are actually technically at risk. You are at risk of being either subjected to addiction or impacted severely by addiction. Now, what does this have to do with human trafficking? Let me tell you the risk factors. So that's one issue in and of itself. And I don't think anyone would argue that there's an impact on our community by those issues. Okay, I'll get to the call of action in a minute. Now, what are the health risk factors, the high risk factors that would put someone at risk of human trafficking? When I say human trafficking, I mean sex trafficking and labor trafficking, which is also inextricably connected to how people come into this country, how people live in our communities, and other socioeconomic issues. So the high-risk factors are a history of abuse, neglect, or drug use, lack of housing, food, or income, mental health issues or low cognitive ability, history of foster or state care, foreign-born, lack of skills, education, homelessness, or unemployment, which has been touched upon by all of these speakers. So technically, if you're impacted or negatively impacted by any of the issues that preceded this, you are in a high risk factor for human sex trafficking or human labor trafficking. So what are the impacts of some of the policies currently under this administration? Marginalization of immigrants and people of color. That's a lot of people. Now, a lot of people over the country. I'm from New York City. There's 8.5 million people, but that's 26% of the population of West Lafayette. Also, appointed secretaries nationally, cabinet members of education, housing, and energy, just to name a few, they are opposed to, hostile to, incompetent to address the community issues. Also, what's currently being discussed is the reduction or the removal of nutritional guidelines for school lunches or school meals. I mean, just like feed them Cheetos, for God's sakes, right? That's what we're saying. You can just feed them anything. Jell-O, Cheetos, just feed them anything. They'll be fine, or we don't care. Access, another impact of policies, access to affordable health care information. Now, you can say that on a national scale. Let's look at some local impacts that impact us in this community. Reduction of services. Do you know they're reducing the amount of maternity wards available in this area, the Tri-County area? I think Frankfurt's maternity ward, I think it's about to disappear or gone, all right? The reduction of public services for the mentally disabled, including we're about to lose another inpatient treatment facility at St. Elizabeth. I mean, it's like, okay, it was over at St. Elizabeth Central, kind of like out of, but we're losing the inpatient facility. Also, If you are any on prescribed drugs, you can't get into the shelters. As a Red Cross volunteer, as someone, you can't get into the shelters. So that's why they have warming centers. They have warming centers for people who can be observed, but in the warming centers, you can't lay down. So if you think there's no homelessness, you're not paying attention in this community. Okay, so that's another local impact. An additional lower impact, and I'm not slamming the schools, I'm an educator, but I have been in and through in the rural areas, not in this county, some of the high school students, some of them can't count. Some of them can't read at the level that they're required to. I know it's a harsh reality and you may be surprised. Most of them cannot write in sentences. I'm not talking about LOL and UR. I'm talking about sentences, subject, predicate. You say subject, predicate, they're like, oh, okay? And so some of them, and most of them cannot sign more than their name. Cursive, forget it. It's not even in school. I say, sign this form. They're like, you mean in cursive, Dr. D? How else do you sign? Okay, so we're talking about basic skills. So low skills put you at at high risk. And the time, this is my personal issue that I am infuriated about, and the only thing that keeps me from getting a baseball bat and a Bible and going out one by one with the sex trafficking issue is the opportunity to impact legislation. But I'll get to the call to action in a minute. It takes years to process a rape kit. Years to process a rape kit. You cannot prosecute without the evidence of a rape kit. I have witnessed dozens of rape kits. I don't even want to describe to you what that's like. It's like getting raped again. And only, in this area, only for those that are above the age of 14. If someone, a child, between 12, 14, 8 years old, is subject to any kind of sexual misconduct, they have to go down to Riley. Who's going to take them? How long are they going to have to wait? How many SANEs are available? These are specially trained nurses available. They come voluntarily. When you call them, they don't have to come. I was in with a current case that I'm working with, and please, God, don't let me say the person's name. I was in the hospital for 17 hours. I refused to leave so that rape kit could be done, because after 48 hours, the risk of not being able to show evidence is so high. But there's only one hospital in this area that you can go to and get a rape kit done. There's a contract for it. And if you don't have health care, it will be paid for. So when we talk about the risk of health care, a lot of women, and let me not, I'm trying not to name too many. I'm not trying not to name the people, but trying not to name the institutions. But I will say this. There are ambulance companies that are not required by law to take you to the only hospital to process the rape kit. There's only one in this area. So if they intentionally take you to the wrong hospital and you don't have health care, even if you were raped by your husband, which is possible, or your wife, if you don't have health care, you can't get a rape kit done. And they intentionally bring you to the wrong hospital because you won't get that rape kit done. And if you don't pay for it out of your pocket, which is almost impossible because nobody knows how to collect the money, if you don't get that done, you can't prosecute. Now, I'm not going to talk about the prosecutor, but you can't prosecute. Okay, that's a local impact. And another one, this is a new one. No, it's not new. It's happened before. KKK pamphlets on windshields and on front doors. If you have a child that, whatever Dr. Atkins, what he spoke to, if you have a child that falls into that category, can you walk down the street and stand on the bus stop? Not and feel safe. So where do you go? Okay, so those are some of the local impacts. So I said, I'm wrapping up. So if you got the hook, I'm wrapping up. Okay, so, I want you to know when you just walk down the street, it just looks so pristine and wonderful and safe. And this is what we have to deal with, and it's only propagated by the policies and the fact that people can turn a blind eye to it. You don't see it. You don't see it unless you go looking for homeless people, unless you go looking for people who were raped, unless you go looking for people who are not eating. You don't know that this is in your community, but it is flagrant. It is flagrant in this area. So let me give you a scenario. A student, Bible scholar, not sexually active, both parents right there, no drug or alcohol use, but has limited access to the internet. So where do you bring this star student? To the public library. They are trolling the public libraries. They are trolling the schoolyards because they don't have the sexual and human traffickers are trolling those areas because that's where you bring the smartest kids. That's where you bring the hungriest kids. That's where you bring the kids where you want them to stay and get information. They are trolling those areas because in this area, it's not like New York City. You don't have video cameras videoing the people who are coming on and off that schoolyard, the people who are going in and out of the public library. And this is not a disparaging remark, but also after we closed the mental health day center, there's all kinds of people just standing out around. You can't tell one from the other. You're thinking this person might be at risk. No, but it's the person who's dressed in a suit who's trolling for your kids. And they're not looking for the 16-year-olds. They're looking for the 12 to 14-year-olds because they know if they get raped, the chances that they're not going to go down to Raleigh. So they're going to get off. And this is what they tell these kids. This is what I want you to know. They tell these kids, and I speak to them in all ages, all ethnic backgrounds, all cultural backgrounds. They tell these kids, if they pick you up, first of all, when you call and you say there's a missing teen, they'll ask you, has it happened before? I'm sitting in the pulpit. What the heck? What the heck does that have to do with anything? My child is missing, go find my child. But depending on your cultural or socioeconomic status, they may or may not decide to go issue an Amber Alert. Did you hear what I said? They may or may not go look for your child. Okay, and I'm not disparaging the police. I'm just saying they may or may not look. It doesn't take long to get somebody out of here. There's no tolls. There's very little records once you cross these borders and you get on these highways, okay? So what they do is they take these kids and they tell them, if they pick you up, first of all, if they pick up a child, they bring them to the juvenile detention center and they arrest them. They arrest them. But if they interview, get the ID of the person who they're with, and they recognize them and they've been up on charges before, they let them go because it's not illegal to walk down the street with a 12 or 14-year-old child unless you have the rape kit. So they take the person, the adult, who they know they have a dossier on, they let them go and they arrest the child. And they tell the child to say this: if you send me home with your parents, if you send me home with my parents, I will kill myself. Now where do you send them? Can you name 3 places to send that child? On a Friday evening at 6:30, if you let them out of the detention center, the DCS, they don't know what to do with them. Where do you send them? Somebody tell me, where's the 3 places you can send a 12 to 14-year-old on Friday at 6:30 if you can't send them home with their parents because they said they're going to kill themselves? 1, hello? Jail. Yeah, I'm talking about if you don't send them in jail, where are you going to send them? There's a something house. What is it? Yep, that's 1. Okay, any more? Okay, any more? How many people can they take? Exactly. That's why you don't know this is happening. There's nowhere to send them, there's nowhere to put them, but keep them in jail. Okay, now they're criminals. Okay, if you catch them twice or 3 times, they put them on house arrest. I have witnessed this. Okay, so now you take that child who was the A student, went to the public library, and look, this is the question I want you to ask yourself. This is not the call to action, but it's coming soon. This is the question I want to ask yourself. Can you take your very well-educated, well-rounded, pristine, virgin child, can they be bought or sold for a cell phone, a video game, snacks, or unlimited TV? Can somebody say, I'll give you a video a video game or a cell phone and unlimited TV for 2 hours, and you can get home instead of going to band practice, and you can get home at the regular time. Can your child be bought or sold for that? I dare you to answer that question, because that's the kids who they got. We're not talking about crack babies, and there's some of those too. We're not talking about them. We're talking about kids who can be influenced by anything. And this is when I was in the prosecutor's office for one of the cases. This is something that I learned. And as a rape survivor advocate, I didn't know this. This was not part of my training. All that person has to say, and I use the term person loosely, all that person has to say is, I have reason to believe that that person, the child or the person who I had consensual sex with was 16 years old. The age of consent is 16. The age of consent is 16. So if I can say, I thought they were 16, that's an issue. So I want to know I want to share with you what the call to action is. Those are some of the issues that I think that we need to address. And so what do solutions look like? The solutions look like getting more training for SANE nurses. The solution looks like hate crime laws that include if somebody is abused in any way, regardless of their age. The solution is limits or injunctions or whatever the legal term is on the processing of rape kits so that they're done in a timely fashion through some kind of legislation. The solution looks like congregate charges against these sex offenders, which means whatever, 3 times strikes, whatever you call it, not just choosing the one that you think will stick, because a 14-year-old may not remember all of the details of the several dates, but you pile on those charges. So if you can prove one and you can prove that they had contact with each other, don't just choose one class 4 felony, which is 2 to 12 years, pile them on so that if you have been charged and they prove that you had contact and they find you guilty of one, they can combine, not concurrently, but congregate, add on those terms so that you don't get off in 2 years. And my call to action is, let me see. Okay, my call to action is make the call. Make the call. Make the call to whatever your legislator is. And look, I am not a big protester. I'm not running through the streets no more. I'm 54 years old. I don't have to take any medication. I'm not running through the street. I'm not standing out in the streets for hours and hours and hours. But look, if that's what you want to do, that's great. If there's millions of people across the country today standing up somewhere, New York City, my hometown, they shut down Manhattan. I think that's awesome. But listen, I'm saying don't march, run. Run. Run for office, support somebody who's running for office, write postcards. Vicki Weasley said postcards. Call your legislators, hold them accountable, make that call. Call the police, call and follow up. It doesn't have to be your kid, because if it's not your kid, if it's not your daughter, if it's not your son, if it's not your niece and nephew, it could be very shortly. So what I'm saying is, look, if you want to march, march. But I'm also requesting that you seriously take an action that results in someone taking an action that legislatively that holds our legislators accountable. Thank you. And vote.
Thank you.